the password she left on my skin. I used to believe good lies sounded like silk and bad ones like gravel. Then I met Rhea and learned the best lies sound like the truth told from the wrong angle. She arrived at my studio with a mood board and a smile that knew where my weaknesses lived. She needed photographs, so she said, of a penthouse that would go on the market for the kind of money that can make people behave like heirs. I shoot spaces for a living, make concrete look patient and glass look wise. Rhea made me look at myself like I was a stranger about to make a decision. He couldn't resist. The first thing she asked was whether the elevator could be stopped on an in-between floor. The second was whether I was good at keeping secrets that didn't belong to me. She stood at the window while I tested light and said the view would make sins look small. Then she took off her blazer like a reveal and drank my water like a promise. I noticed the faint mark a ring would have left. There wasn't one. There was a bracelet, thin gold, with a charm shaped like a blank tag. Later, when I kissed the place just below it, she whispered a string of numbers against my neck that felt like a password. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe that's what I turned it into. We met again a week later, then once more after that, always in rooms that smelled expensive and forgot our names when we left. She told me she handled partners for a venture firm, matchmaker for ambition, though the way she spoke about negotiating made me think she'd be just as good at arranging a surrender. I didn't know who she belonged to. I didn't ask. She never wore a ring, and when I traced the pale notch where one might have lived, she took my hand like a treaty. I left fingerprints on her future, and tried not to think about the ones she was leaving on mine. One wet Thursday she texted me a gate code and an address in a neighborhood that had learned how to be rich without becoming kind. The building wore stone like an argument. The elevator was the kind I always want to steal, a private key reader, an old-fashioned dial that moved with the thinnest of clicks. She booked the roof lounge under a fake last name and a real sense of entitlement. The room had the brevity of good design. Outside, the pool pretended it didn't know what rain was. We kept it just on the right side of PG, the way you do when a camera might be sleeping with one eye open. I pressed her back against a chilled column and learned how to map a shiver with my mouth. She untucked my shirt and spelled those same numbers on my skin with the tip of her finger. That's when the elevator dinged and brought me reality with a man inside it. He looked like the reason people obey gates. Gray suit, soft tie, an ease that came from paying for consequences in advance. He stepped out and glanced at us not like a voyeur or a prude, but like a landlord auditing the wallpaper. Rhea straightened her blouse with a practiced flick and moved toward him wearing a smile I had not earned. "Ren," she said, and the name landed between us like a signature. "You're early." He kissed her cheek and left the faintest smudge of cologne in the air. It smelled like cedar that believed in itself. He didn't look at me long enough for it to count, just enough to memorize. "And you are?" he asked, pleasant as a ransom. "I take pictures of what people wish their lives looked like," I said, because I wanted him to know I could afford a line. "Then you'll love my life," he said, and offered a hand I didn't take. "We're testing access controls. Rhea believes they're imperfect. I prefer to think of them as encouraging. You'll help us decide which." Us, I heard. Not you and I, not Rhea and me. A third pronoun, a closed circle. I felt the digits Rhea had written on my skin go from lover's code to lock combination. I wondered which door it would open and who would be waiting on the other side. We played polite for 10 minutes that felt longer. Ren asked clever questions about cameras I'd already noticed. He didn't ask about the damp edge of Rhea's blouse or the heat I hadn't had time to leave. He touched her elbow lightly as they walked the terrace, an ownership so refined it could pass for courtesy. When he excused himself to take a call, she slid back to me, eyes bright with the particular hunger people have when they've already decided to be reckless. "Not your husband," I said. It wasn't a question. I was tired of question marks. "Not my anything," she said. "Ren manages a fund, I manage him." She kissed the corner of my mouth like a correction. "Do you trust me?" I could have said yes and meant it. I could have said no and meant it. I said, "Enough to jump." "Good," she said, tapping my chest where the numbers still burned. "Because I need you to land on your feet." That night she sent me a calendar invite without a subject. The location was a media company whose glass looked thicker than honesty and whose lobby had learned to whisper. The building was famous for two things: producing stories that decide elections and making interns believe they were candles. When I arrived, Rhea was already by the turnstiles in a white dress that made strangers walk differently. She pressed a visitor badge into my palm and ushered me into an elevator that moved like it had opinions. "We're not here to tour the studio," she said. "We're here to meet a man who thinks he's the studio." His office was upstairs, a corner diagram of power. He had the body of a retired athlete and the manners of a practicing one. His name was Tio, and he owned more of the feeds you scroll than your thumb would forgive. He greeted Rhea like a favorite niece and me like a favor he'd already granted. "Rhea says you're discreet and good with pictures," he said. "Usually those two come separately." "I'm a one-stop shop," I said. He laughed the way men laugh when they sincerely like the sound of their own taste. "We're doing a profile on Ren," he said, almost idly. "People like him. They trust him with their greed. We want to see if that trust is transferable. Are you familiar with the concept of narrative preloading?" "I've heard rumors," I said, because I read and because I'm not naive enough to call it prophecy. He steepled his fingers. "We release a soft piece that makes the audience feel seen the day before someone else releases a hard piece that makes them feel betrayed. They reconcile the two by choosing the warmer one. This isn't illegal. It's not even unusual. It's a weather pattern." Rhea watched me watch him. I watched the gold watch on his wrist watch me back. The bracelet's blank tag brushed Rhea's pulse as she shifted. I thought of the first night, of numbers written on skin. I wondered if Ren knew math wasn't the only arithmetic in the room. "Why am I here?" I asked. "Because you can put us in the room Ren keeps locked and tell us where the mirrors are," Tio said. "Because you know where the cameras sleep." He smiled. "Because Rhea trusts you enough to bring you somewhere you can hurt her." She handed me a folder that wasn't heavy enough to hold paper. "Tomorrow night," she said, "Ren is hosting an off-calendar meeting at the Ardent, the top-floor suite. The list doesn't exist outside someone's head. One of the people attending would prefer that profile of him to be kinder than the truth, and the other would prefer the opposite. Your job is to document a conversation and deliver it to me. After that, you act like you've never heard of me." "Why me?" I asked. Not because I needed to know, but because sometimes the worst thing in a room is silence. "Because you'll do it," she said. "You're good at wanting complicated things." I should have walked. I should have returned the badge and the folder and taken a purifying shower in somebody else's integrity. Instead, I thought about the way she had pressed those numbers into me like a seal. I thought about how I could feel them even now, faint as heat. The Ardent was a hotel designed to make decadents feel politely educated. The suite could host a treaty signing and not blink. I arrived with a catering crate and a folded black shirt as a costume. The kitchen had a door that led only to people who knew it existed. I slid through it, up the service elevator, down a hallway carpeted with the sound of softened footsteps. I set my cameras in places cameras don't like to be, behind a lattice of sculpture, inside an empty champagne bucket, under the lip of a console table. I wore one on my chest under the false black shirt. It felt like guilt. Ren came in first. He looked tired the way ambitious men look when they've chosen which parts of themselves to neglect and are asking their mirrors for understanding. A woman I recognized from a regulator's photo came next, then a man whose jacket cost more than my equipment but less than his attention. They spoke low and not in complete sentences, like professionals who understand that verbs are liabilities. Rhea arrived last, not late, just delayed enough to vaccinate the moment against uncertainty. She wore navy and constraint and the blank tag bracelet that now felt like a dare. I watched her touch Ren's arm with the exact amount of familiarity required to diffuse suspicion. She took a seat where my lens would favor her spine and my guilt would favor mine. The conversation was exactly not what anyone would admit to having. It wasn't a conspiracy. That would have been too tidy. It was three people agreeing on the shape of the room for the next 6 months, which questions would be answered and which ones would be treated like rhetorical, which numbers would be presented and which would be interpreted, which stories would enter on tiptoe. Everyone spoke as if the other two would be honorable about the betrayal they intended. Half an hour in, Ren's phone lit with a name that made his mouth tense. He silenced it without looking and refilled his glass in a way that made me think of surrender rehearsals. Rhea leaned over and said something soft. He nodded like a man accepting the weather. When they broke, I broke too, down the service hall, into the elevator, out through a loading bay that smelled like boxes that had learned the word secrets. I sent the files from a cafe that tried too hard with its foam art. The transfer bar crawled like a conscience. Rhea answered with a single sentence, "You're done. I'll meet you to say thank you and goodbye." She chose a bar that looked cheap and wasn't. The lighting made everyone believe their lives were slightly more interesting. She ordered a whiskey and didn't drink it. I watched the ice explain itself to the glass. "Do you want the truth?" she asked, and for the first time I believed she might offer it. "Yes," I said, because no was the wrong shape in my mouth. "Ren is going to win or lose with or without me," she said. "I wanted him to win without becoming someone he hates. Tia wants him to win without becoming someone Tio hates. The regulator wants him to lose politely. You wanted me. I wanted you to want the same thing I wanted while I wanted another thing entirely." "What did you want?" I asked. "For someone to write the password on my skin and mean it," she said. She reached, tracing the air above my collarbone, close enough that I could feel memory rise to meet her. "I thought maybe it could be you. I thought maybe I could let it." "And now?" I asked. "Now we broke the elevator," she said. "It remembers floors that shouldn't exist." She slid a small envelope across the table. It had my name on it in a handwriting I'd recognize in smoke. "The payment you refused," she said, "and something else." Inside, beneath the check I didn't want to cash, lay the bracelet's blank tag, no chain, no clasp, just the charm. On the back, a number had been etched, hers, I thought, or Ren's, or mine. "Which is it?" I asked. She smiled like a mercy. "If you have to ask, don't call." We didn't kiss. We didn't touch. We left like the end of a scene you're not sure the director will keep. 2 days later, the profile landed, warm and flattering without pretending Ren was a saint. A week later, a harsher piece landed somewhere else, carefully sourced but out of breath, like it had been rushed. The market sneezed and then carried on pretending it wasn't sick. Ren's company filed papers with numbers that looked like they'd been taught manners. The regulator's face appeared at hearings and asked the kind of questions that let answers behave themselves. Tia hosted a panel about ethical influence and forgot to invite the conscience he thought he owned. Rhea disappeared from public calendars like a ship into good fog. I heard she took a sabbatical to somewhere with mountains and a lake that listens. I heard she married a man who believed in quiet. I heard she didn't marry anyone at all and started a fund that only invests in companies that invent apologies you don't have to read twice. I kept shooting buildings. I kept making the crooked feel straight for money that doesn't ask questions. Some nights I still feel her numbers flare where she wrote them, and I press a thumb there the way you press a bruise to see if it's still yours. The bracelet's tag lives in my desk, beside a pile of old memory cards that contain rooms I will never revisit. Sometimes I pick it up and hold it to the light. Sometimes I put it in my mouth and let the metal taste remind me that some passwords are better when you never learn what they open. If you need me to tell you I was the hero, I can't. If you need me to be the villain, I'm only half committed. I helped a woman bend a story into a shape she could live with. I told myself it was mercy. I told myself it was love. The truth is that I wanted both and settled for a better angle. I still think about the elevator, the way it paused between floors when she pressed her palm to mine and said, "Trust me." You shouldn't be able to stop a thing like that in midair. But we did, and for a minute the cables held and the room forgot its destination, and I saw us reflected in the brushed steel. Two people who had already decided which lies would be worth keeping, and were brave enough to say them out loud without flinching. Maybe that's what the password really was. Not a code to open a door, but a sentence to tell yourself when the room goes quiet and the truth tries to change the subject. I say it sometimes under my breath, when I'm setting a tripod or waiting for an empty lobby to remember it's a stage. I say it and feel the numbers rise where she left them, and I remember the night the view made our sins look small, and I know they weren't, and I also know why we did what we did. It isn't justification, it's inventory. And on the good days, the ledger balances. I didn't betray the part of me that wanted softness, and I didn't sell out the part that wanted to be useful. On the bad days, I admit the arithmetic was off and sit with it until the math looks back and nods like an old friend with a new scar. If I ever see Rhea again, I'll ask her for nothing and thank her for everything. I'll hand her the blank tag and watch her decide whether to take it. Maybe she'll laugh and leave it in my palm. Maybe she'll slide it onto a new chain and show me the number engraved on the back, and maybe it will be mine. I doubt it. But doubt is just another way to keep a door from closing, and some doors deserve to stay ajar, if only long enough to remember the shape of the room on the other side.